In a quiet corner of Arkansas, in a town most Americans couldn't find on a map, there sits a small brick building with the words Walton's 5 and 10 inches painted on the front. Tourists walk by it every day without realizing what they're looking at. It looks like a museum piece, a relic, a charming little shop from a forgotten decade. But this is not a relic. This is ground zero. Because what started inside that building grew into the single largest concentration of inherited wealth in human history. One family, 5 people. More money than 40% of the entire United States combined. That's not a metaphor. That's not rhetoric. That's a statistic. And it's been verified by economists, fact checkers, and the Federal Reserve's own survey data. If you lined up every American family from poorest to richest and added them up one by one, you would have to stack roughly 50 million households on top of each other before you matched what the Walton family is worth today. And the wildest part of this story isn't the number. The wildest part is how they got it, and more importantly, how they've kept it. Because the Walton fortune isn't just big, it's been engineered, shielded, and multiplied by one of the most sophisticated private wealth operations on the planet. And almost nobody is talking about it. This is the story of the Walmart empire. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand something that most people never will. That the richest family in the world didn't build anything, they inherited a machine. And that machine is still printing money for them every second of every day. To understand how we got here, you have to go back to 1945. A 27-year-old Army veteran named Sam Walton walked into a bank in Newport, Arkansas, and borrowed $25,000 from his father-in-law. With that money, he bought a single Ben Franklin variety store, one of those old 5 and dime shops that sold buttons and thread and cheap toys. Sam wasn't a genius. He wasn't a visionary with a grand plan. He was a restless, hyper-competitive small-town retailer who couldn't sit still and couldn't stop tinkering. He obsessed over price tags. He memorized what every competitor was charging for every item within 50 miles. He flew his own plane over rural Arkansas looking for towns big enough to support a store, but small enough that no one else would bother. And in 1950, after losing the lease on his Newport store in a deal his own landlord muscled him out of, he started over in a town of 3,000 people called Bentonville. He picked Bentonville for 2 reasons. His wife wanted small-town living, and he wanted access to quail hunting in 4 states. That's it. That's the origin story of the richest family in the world. A guy who wanted to go hunting on the weekends. 12 years later, on July 2nd, 1962, Sam Walton opened the first store that bore the Walmart name in Rogers, Arkansas. The signs out front said 2 things: "We sell for less," and "Satisfaction guaranteed." And here's the part the official history glosses over. Everyone thought he was going to fail. The entire retail industry believed that discount stores could only survive in big cities with big populations. Walton did the opposite. He went to towns that were too small for Kmart and Target to bother with. Towns with 6,000 people. Towns with 1 stoplight. And once he was in those towns, nobody could compete with him because the market wasn't big enough for 2 discount stores. He wasn't building a retailer. He was building a network of local monopolies, one sleepy southern town at a time. By 1970, he had 38 stores. By 1980, Walmart crossed $1 billion in annual sales faster than any company in American history. And by 1990, it had passed Sears to become the largest retailer in the United States. Sam Walton died 2 years later, in April 1992, 1 week after his 74th birthday. According to his own son, he was still reviewing sales data from his hospital bed in the final days of his life. And on the day he died, everything he had built passed to his wife and 4 children. That is the moment the Walton dynasty was born. Not in 1950, Not in 1962, but in 1992, when the machine was handed over. Here's what most people don't understand about inherited wealth at this scale. When Sam Walton died, his personal net worth was around $8.5 billion. The net years now, that was already one of the largest fortunes in America. But it was nothing. Nothing compared to what was coming. Because the Walton heirs didn't spend the money. They didn't break it up. They didn't try to build their own companies with it. They did something far smarter. They held the stock. They held it through the 90s. They held it through the dot-com crash. They held it through 2008. They held it through the pandemic. And they let Walmart do the work for them. Every year, Walmart opened more stores. Every year, it squeezed more cents out of every dollar of revenue. Every year, the stock ticked upward. And because the family collectively owns roughly 44 to 49% of all Walmart shares, depending on the year, every single move in that stock price multiplied their fortune by a factor that no human being can really comprehend. In 1992, the combined Walton family net worth was measured in the single-digit billions. By 2012, it was around $90 billion. By 2020, it had passed $200 billion. And as of 2026, the Walton family is worth more than $500 billion. $500 billion. Let that number sit in your head for a second. That is more than the entire gross domestic product of countries like Belgium, Thailand, or Norway. That is more than the market cap of Coca-Cola. That is more money than any family in recorded history has ever controlled at one time. Not the Rothschilds, not the Rockefellers, not the Medicis. Nobody. The Waltons are, right now, in 2026, the richest family that has ever existed. And here's the detail that makes this whole thing so surreal. None of them run Walmart. None of them work there. None of them sit in the CEO's office making decisions. They are passive shareholders. They sit on yachts, or boards of art museums, or in box seats at NFL games they own, and they watch a number go up. So how does a family this rich compare to everyone else? This is where the story stops being impressive and starts being disturbing. Economists have been tracking this comparison for over a decade. The first major study came out in 2012, when economist Sylvia Allegretto at the University of California, Berkeley ran the numbers using Federal Reserve data. What she found was almost too absurd to be believed. 6 Walton heirs, at that time, had a combined net worth equal to the bottom 41.5% of all American families put together. 41.5%. That's roughly 49 million households. Every car in every driveway, every house, every savings account, every retirement fund, every dollar in every checking account, stacked together into one giant pile, and it still didn't equal what 6 people in one family already owned. And when critics pushed back and said, "Well, that's not fair, you're counting families with negative net worth, families in debt," the economists recalculated without them, and the Waltons were still richer than the bottom 28%. Then the fortune kept growing. By 2013, the comparison had climbed to 43%. And remember, back in 2013, the Walton family was worth around $140 billion. Today, in 2026, they're worth more than $500 billion. The inequality hasn't just continued. It has accelerated to a degree that makes the original comparison look quaint. We no longer have good public data at this scale because the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances doesn't update every year, and it deliberately excludes people on the Forbes 400 list for privacy reasons. But the trajectory is obvious. The gap between this one family and everyone below them on the wealth ladder has not shrunk. It has ballooned. And the framing, more than the bottom 40%, is now almost certainly an understatement. But here's the question nobody in the mainstream press ever really answers. How is this possible? How does one family, none of whom founded the company, none of whom run it, none of whom did anything but inherit shares from a dead relative, end up with more wealth than tens of millions of working Americans combined? The answer lies in two places. The first is Walmart itself, a machine built to extract pennies from every transaction at a scale the world had never seen before. And the second is a quiet, almost invisible company called Walton Enterprises. Let's start with the machine. Walmart today is the largest private employer in the United States, with around 1.6 million American workers on its payroll. Globally, it employs over 2 million people. It operates more than 10,500 stores in 19 countries. 90% of Americans live within 10 miles of a Walmart or a Sam's Club. Its annual revenue is roughly $720 billion, which makes it the single largest company by sales in the United States. And here's the thing. It runs on razor-thin margins. Walmart's net profit margin is somewhere between 2 and 3%, depending on the quarter. If you buy a $20 shirt at Walmart, they're making maybe 50 cents on it. That doesn't sound like much, but when you do that 720 billion times a year, you end up with an operating income of $28 to $30 billion annually, and every penny of that flows upward toward the shareholders. And who's the biggest shareholder? The Walton family. Through a private holding company called Walton Enterprises, the family collectively controls around 44% of all outstanding Walmart stock. When Walmart's stock price goes up 1%, the Walton family's net worth goes up by billions. When Walmart beats earnings by a few cents per share, the Walton family gets richer by the cost of a small country's GDP. And because they've held the stock for decades, and because they collect dividends on every single share, they have been quietly siphoning an enormous stream of cash out of Walmart's global operations for more than 30 years. None of this is illegal. None of it is even unusual in the world of inherited dynastic wealth. But the scale is what's staggering. Now here's the part that most people have never heard of. The real secret weapon of the Walton family isn't Walmart. It's Walton Enterprises. Walton Enterprises is a private family office, essentially a corporate structure that exists for one reason and one reason only: to hold, protect, and grow the Walton family's wealth across generations. It operates almost entirely out of public view. It doesn't file the kinds of disclosures that normal public companies do. It doesn't advertise. It doesn't give interviews. But public records reveal that it manages real estate developments, a stock portfolio worth over $4 billion in conservative ETFs and bonds, and the mechanisms by which Walmart shares are passed from one generation of Waltons to the next. And here's where it gets interesting. Financial journalists who have dug into the family's estate planning have documented the family's use of a tax strategy so aggressive it has a nickname: the Jackie O Trust, named after Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, whose own will famously used this structure. In plain English, a Jackie O Trust is a charitable lead annuity trust. The way it works is this: you put money into a trust. The trust pays a fixed annual amount to charity for a set number of years. And at the end of that period, whatever's left goes to your heirs, tax-free. If the assets inside the trust grow faster than the IRS's assumed interest rate, your heirs can end up receiving a fortune that was never taxed as a gift and never taxed as an inheritance. Investigative reporter Zachary Miter documented that the Waltons have used this structure so effectively that in theory they could give billions to charity and still pass more money to their heirs than if they'd never donated a cent. This isn't tax evasion, it is tax avoidance, which is legal. But it tells you something important about how fortunes of this size are maintained. The ordinary laws of inheritance that apply to regular families. The estate tax, the gift tax, the generation-skipping transfer tax. All of them have loopholes, and the Waltons have found every single one. And then there's what the family actually does with the money, because $500 billion is so much capital that it's almost impossible to spend it in any conventional sense. So the Waltons have branched out. Rob Walton, the oldest son of Sam, bought the Denver Broncos NFL franchise in 2022 for $4.5 billion. The most expensive sports team purchase in American history at the time. Alice Walton, Sam's only daughter, built a world-class art museum in Bentonville called Crystal Bridges, filling it with a collection worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Jim Walton, the youngest son, runs Arvest Bank, a regional lender with more than 260 branches across 3 states that the family has quietly controlled for decades. And the next generation is already moving into new territory. The grandchildren have been given voting rights over the family's Walmart holdings. Some of them are investing in artificial intelligence startups, clean energy, sandnut, and mountain biking parks in the family's hometown. One of them, Christy Walton, took out a full-page advertisement in the New York Times in 2025 promoting a nationwide protest. A striking move for a family that has historically stayed out of politics. The point is, the Walton fortune is no longer just Walmart stock. It has metastasized. It has spread across sports teams, banks, art collections, foundations, venture capital bets, and conservation projects on multiple continents. The family is not one fortune anymore. It is an ecosystem. But here's where the story gets uncomfortable. Because for all the money flowing upward, there is a counter story flowing underneath it. The average Walmart worker in the United States earns between $15 and $17 an hour. Full-time workers at the company have historically qualified for public assistance programs like food stamps and Medicaid, in numbers large enough that multiple studies have documented Walmart as one of the single largest employers whose workers rely on taxpayer-funded safety net programs. In other words, a significant portion of the wage bill at the richest family's company has been, for years, effectively subsidized by American taxpayers. Meanwhile, the family that owns the company has become $450 billion richer. The math here is not subtle. Every dollar that Walmart doesn't pay its workers in wages is, at the margin, a dollar that flows upward into the share price. And because the family owns almost half the shares, they capture almost half of every one of those dollars. This is the part of the empire that doesn't appear in the glossy corporate histories. This is the part that the Sam Walton biographies skip over. The idea that the richest family in the world built their fortune on everyday low prices is only half the story. The other half is that those low prices come from somewhere. They come from suppliers squeezed so hard that American manufacturing moved offshore to meet Walmart's price demands. They come from a workforce paid the absolute minimum the labor market will bear. And they come from a supply chain so ruthlessly optimized that the company can undercut almost any competitor on almost any product. That's not a criticism of capitalism. That's a description of how this particular machine works. So where does this all go? What happens next? Well, Walmart stock keeps climbing. As of early 2026, the company's market cap is approaching $1 trillion. The family has already added roughly $32 billion to their fortune in the first few months of this year alone. At the current rate of growth, they will cross $600 billion and then $700 billion. And at some point, the comparison will no longer be 40% of Americans. It will be 50%. And the interesting thing is, nothing about this trajectory is hidden. The numbers are published every year. Bloomberg tracks them. Forbes tracks them. The Federal Reserve publishes its survey data every 3 years. Anyone who wants to know exactly how much money the Walton family controls can look it up in 10 seconds. And yet, when you ask the average American who the richest family in the world is, most people don't know. They'll guess the Rothschilds, or the Saudi royal family, or maybe the Rockefellers. The right answer? A family from Bentonville, Arkansas, whose grandfather opened a dime store next to a barbershop in 1950, isn't even on most people's radar. And that, I think, is the real story of the Walmart empire. Not how much they have, not how they got it, but how quietly they've held it. Because the greatest trick a dynasty can pull is to make its own existence feel like the natural order of things. The Waltons don't throw lavish parties. They don't fight in the tabloids. They don't run for office. 3 of the Walton siblings live relatively private lives in Arkansas. They let the machine do the work, and the machine, as it turns out, does the work very, very well. Sam Walton once said his philosophy could be summed up in 10 simple rules, but the 11th rule, the one he never wrote down, was the most powerful one of all. Build something so big, so efficient, and so indispensable that the people who inherit it will never have to do anything at all. And on that one, he succeeded beyond anyone's wildest imagination. The question now isn't whether the Walton Empire will keep growing. It will. The question is what it means for the rest of us when one family in one country in one generation can accumulate more wealth than tens of millions of their fellow citizens. And when the system that made it possible is not a bug, but a feature. Because the real Walmart empire isn't a chain of stores. It's a blueprint. And it's working exactly the way it was designed to.